We'll just keep pretending to be nice as long as we can get her to sign the paper. I stood in the kitchen, my hand still gripping the phone. The screen hadn't gone dark. There was no click, no beep, just silence. Then, a breath. My mother's voice again, fainter, speaking to someone else. My father. They thought I'd hung up. They thought I was gone, but I was still there, listening. She's always been soft-hearted, my father said, his voice carrying that familiar mixture of affection and dismissal. This'll be easy. My mother laughed. Not cruel, but satisfied, conspiratorial. Remember to mention your back and my retirement account, all the sacrifices, the burden we carried all these years, he added. Another laugh, lighter. I didn't make a sound. I just stood there, afternoon light streaming through the window, illuminating dust motes. Everything looked the same as 5 minutes ago. The blue bowl, the cracked tile, the coffee stain I kept meaning to scrub. But nothing was the same. I still didn't know what paper they wanted me to sign. I didn't know what scheme they'd been cooking up, what favor they were about to ask. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The family I thought I had, the one I'd spent 32 years trying to please, trying to be good enough for, had never existed at all. I grew up in rural Pennsylvania where my Dutch-American parents worked hard and argued harder. Dad drove trucks, Mom worked reception at the county hospital. Money was tight, and I learned early that my existence tied to their suffering. We gave up everything for you, my mother would say, folding laundry with sharp movements. Your father could have taken that Ohio promotion, but we stayed for your school. Do you understand what that cost? I was 8. I didn't understand, but I learned to nod. My father's version was different, but the same. Your mother and I work ourselves to the bone. The least you could do is show appreciation. This came after I'd forgotten the trash or gotten a B or simply existed in a way that reminded them of their choices. They never hit me, never screamed. The weapon was subtler, disappointment wrapped in martyrdom, love offered with conditions I could never meet. By 12, I'd internalized 3 survival rules. First, stay quiet, don't cause waves, make myself small. Second, blame myself first. Easier to assume it was my fault than watch them twist reality. Third, give to receive. Love wasn't free. It was earned through compliance, sacrifice, endless apologies for being born. I remembered one dinner when I was 15. I'd mentioned art school. My mother set down her fork with exaggerated care. Art school, she'd repeated, while your father and I eat ramen to save for college. That's nice, Nancy. Real nice. I withdrew my applications, went to community college, told myself it was my choice. The guilt was always there, a low hum in the background of my life. I couldn't name what I'd done wrong, couldn't point to the specific moment I'd become a burden, but I knew, the way you know you're breathing or that your heart is beating, that I owed them everything and could never repay it. The call that changed everything started innocently enough. I'd phoned my father about some paperwork I needed, something about the plumbing repairs on the house, documentation for my records. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I'd just gotten home from work, kicked off my shoes, and decided to get this small task off my list. Nancy! My father's voice had been warm, almost excited. How's my girl? We'd made small talk. He'd asked about my job at the nonprofit downtown. Mom had gotten on the line too, asking if I was eating well, if I needed anything. There was something in their voices though, something I couldn't quite identify. A performance quality, an eagerness that felt calculated. Actually, Mom had said, her voice casual, we were hoping to stop by this weekend. There's something we wanted to discuss with you. Nothing serious, just some family planning stuff. Sure, I'd said. What kind of stuff? Oh, we'll explain when we see you. It's easier in person, just some paperwork, really. Legal things, boring adult stuff. She'd laughed. You know how your father worries about having everything documented properly. There were red flags I should have noticed. The studied vagueness, the careful emphasis on paperwork, the way they'd both stayed on the line instead of one handing off to the other like they usually did. The rehearsed quality of their casualness, the way my mother had laughed just a beat too long. But I was used to ignoring my instincts when it came to my parents. I'd spent a lifetime talking myself out of what I felt, explaining away the uncomfortable moments, giving them the benefit of every doubt. Okay, I'd said. I'll see you Saturday then. Perfect. We love you, sweetheart. Love you too. I'm going to hang up now. Okay, honey. Talk soon. But my phone hadn't disconnected. I'd pressed the button wrong, or the screen had been unresponsive, or maybe it was just fate. Instead of the call ending, it continued. I was about to try again when I heard my mother's voice. Different now, the warmth stripped away. We'll just keep pretending to be nice as long as we can get her to sign the paper. I froze. She's always been soft-hearted, my father replied. This'll be easy, my mother's laugh. Remember to mention your back and my retirement account, all the sacrifices we made, the burden we carried all these years. They laughed together. Then my father continued, the house is worth what now? 800 something? Could get 900 if we're lucky. Split 3 ways, that's a solid retirement cushion. My grandmother's house. They were talking about my grandmother's house. She'll sign it over, Mom said with certainty. She's always felt guilty, and legally it should have been family property anyway. Her mother clearly wasn't thinking straight at the end, leaving everything to just one grandchild. Nancy was always the burden from the start, Dad said. Least she can do is help us out now. My hand was shaking. I pressed the red button. This time, the call ended. I stood in my kitchen, my grandmother's kitchen, and felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart breaking, something else. Something that had been holding me together in a shape that was never really mine. My grandmother's house had been my sanctuary long before it became my home. Oma Johnson, we called her by the Dutch title, lived 40 minutes away in a town that still had a main street with a hardware store and a diner that served breakfast all day. Her house was a modest 2-story with white siding and blue shutters, built in the 1950s when she and my grandfather first arrived from the Netherlands. Every other weekend, starting when I was about 7, I'd find an excuse to visit. At first, my parents would drop me off, grateful for the free babysitting. Later, I'd take the bus. Oma never asked why I came so often. She'd just open the door, smile, and say, "Perfect timing. I was about to make tea." Her house was different from ours in every way. Quieter. Sunlight came through the windows without seeming harsh. The furniture was worn but comfortable. There was a garden out back where she grew tomatoes, herbs, and flowers whose names I learned over the years. Black-eyed Susans, bee balm, coneflowers. She taught me practical things. How to balance a checkbook, how to change a tire, how to make bread from scratch, kneading the dough until my arms ached but in a satisfying way. How to fix a leaky faucet and patch drywall and negotiate with contractors. Self-sufficiency, she'd say, her Dutch accent still present after 50 years in America, is the greatest gift you can give yourself. But more than the skills, she taught me something I hadn't known was possible. Unconditional presence. She never asked what I could do for her, never mentioned sacrifice. When I made mistakes, and I made plenty, especially as a teenager, she'd help me figure out solutions without making me feel like my errors were catastrophic moral failures. I remembered one afternoon when I was 16, sitting at her kitchen table after a fight with my mother. I'd been crying, trying to explain why I felt so guilty all the time, why I could never seem to be good enough. Oma had sat across from me, her weathered hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "Nancy," she'd said quietly, "you have value just by existing. You don't owe anyone, not even your parents, your entire life as payment for being born. But they sacrificed so much. They made choices," she'd interrupted, firm but gentle. "Adults make choices. That's what being a parent is. But children don't owe their parents their souls. Do you understand?" I hadn't. Not then. But I'd held on to those words anyway, tucking them away like seeds that might someday grow. As I got older, I'd helped her with house maintenance, and she'd paid me fairly for my work, not as charity, but as respect. "You did the labor," she'd say. "You earned the money." When I graduated college, late at 24, after working my way through, she'd been the only family member who'd shown up to the ceremony. No guilt trip, no mention of how she'd had to drive 2 hours, just pride. "You did this," she'd said, hugging me tight. "You built this." Oma died on a Tuesday in March, sudden, a stroke while she was in her garden, planting early peas. The neighbor found her an hour later, the seed packets still in her apron pocket. I was 28. The grief was enormous and uncomplicated, pure loss without the tangled threads of resentment or obligation that seemed to weave through everything else in my life. The funeral was small. My parents attended, appropriately somber. They'd never been close to Oma. There'd been some kind of falling out when I was very young, before my memories started. Something about money and boundaries and the way my mother wanted to raise me. They'd maintained polite contact, but nothing more. 2 weeks after the funeral, Oma's attorney called me in for the reading of the will. I'd expected maybe a few $1,000s, some of her jewelry, perhaps her recipe box. What I got was everything. The house, appraised at $875,000, her savings account, $82,000, her stocks and bonds, another $140,000. All of it, every single asset, left solely to me. My parents received $5,000 each, a token, the lawyer explained, to indicate they weren't forgotten, but that this was an intentional choice. My mother called me that evening, her voice tight. "Did you know about this?" "No, I had no idea." $1 million, Nancy. She left you nearly $1 million and gave us nothing. We're her family, too. My father got on the line. "Your mother and I were thinking maybe we should contest this. She was old. She might not have been—" "She was completely sound," I'd interrupted. "The lawyer said she updated it last year. She knew exactly what she was doing." Silence, then my mother, her voice shifting to something softer, more fragile. "Well, of course it's yours legally. We just thought, we're family. We'll figure this out together, right? That house, it's been in the family for decades. We all should benefit." That should have been my first warning. Within 3 months, my parents had spent both their $5,000 inheritances. New furniture, a trip to Atlantic City, a used motorcycle my father had always wanted. Then the calls started. "We were thinking," Mom said during one conversation, "that house is too big for one person. What if we moved in? We could all save money. We're family after all." I was still grieving, still processing, still operating under the old rules where saying no to my parents meant I was selfish and ungrateful. "Okay," I'd said, "for a while, until you get settled." They'd moved in a week later, and that's when the house they'd received nothing from became the family house in every conversation. Our house. This house. Never Nancy's house. I'd signed the deed, my name was on every document, but somehow I was still just living in something that belonged to them. The takeover happened slowly, then all at once. First month, "We'll pay you rent, of course. We just need to get our finances organized." Second month, "It doesn't make sense to pay you rent when we're family. We can contribute to groceries instead." Third month, no mention of money at all. They'd moved into the largest bedroom, the one with the bay window overlooking the garden. My grandmother's room. I'd said yes because refusing felt petty. It was just a room, right? Then my father started repainting. "The house needs updating," he'd said. "These colors are so dated." The soft cream walls Oma had loved became builder beige. The blue trim turned white. My mother rearranged furniture. "We need to make this place feel like home." Oma's antique sideboard, the one she'd brought from the Netherlands, went into storage. Her rocking chair disappeared. "Too worn out," Mom had said. "We donated it." I'd stood in the living room one evening, barely recognizing the space where I'd spent so many peaceful weekends, and felt something churning in my stomach, but I'd pushed it down. They were my parents. They'd sacrificed so much. This was just compromise. This was family. Then came the bigger suggestions. "Your grandmother's retirement strategy was too conservative," Dad announced one Sunday over dinner. "That house is sitting on $700,000 in equity now. We could leverage it." "Leverage it?" I'd asked, my stomach already tightening with the familiar dread that came with these conversations. "A home equity line of credit. Look, Nancy, your mother and I aren't getting any younger. We've worked our whole lives. Your father's back is shot from those years driving truck. My knees are terrible from standing all day at the hospital. We deserve to enjoy our retirement years while we still can." "You're only 58, I'd pointed out, trying to keep my voice neutral. "That's early for retirement." "Exactly. That's the perfect retirement age. We've earned the right to travel, to live a little, to see the world before we're too old to enjoy it. Think about it. We could finally take that trip to Europe we've always dreamed about. Visit the Netherlands, see where your grandmother came from, walk the streets she walked. Wouldn't that be meaningful? Wouldn't that honor her memory?" The guilt came flooding back, that old familiar friend. They'd worked hard. They'd raised me. Was I really going to be the kind of daughter who denied her parents a comfortable retirement? "How much are we talking about?" I'd asked. $50,000. We'd pay you back, obviously, with interest." I'd paid for their Europe trip, all of it. Flights, hotels, tours, meals. $63,000 when it was done. They'd sent postcards. "Having a wonderful time. So glad you made this possible." I'd stared at those postcards and felt hollowed out. though I couldn't say why, but it was the conversation I'd overheard that made everything clear. The one that happened 3 months after they'd returned, tanned and relaxed. The one where I'd called to ask about paperwork for the plumbing repairs. The one where they'd forgotten to hang up. The one where my mother said, "We'll just keep pretending to be nice as long as we can get her to sign the paper." Standing in the kitchen, my house, the home my grandmother had built and loved and carefully protected, I finally understood. This had never been about family. It had been about money, about control, about squeezing every last drop of value from the daughter they'd always seen as a burden. I didn't confront them. Not that day, not that week. Instead, I did something I'd never done before. I became strategic. The old Nancy would have called back immediately, crying, demanding explanations. The old Nancy would have made a scene, giving them the opportunity to rewrite reality, to explain it away, to make me feel guilty for misunderstanding. But something had shifted. That crack I'd felt in my chest wasn't breaking, it was opening, letting light into places that had been dark for 32 years. I went to work the next day, smiled at colleagues, attended meetings, came home to the house where my parents were watching TV in the living room, eating snacks, completely comfortable. "How was your day, honey?" Mom asked. "Fine," I said. "Normal." Inside, I was somewhere else entirely. Inside, I was calculating. That weekend, I told them I had a work retreat and would be gone for 2 days. Instead, I drove to the city and met with an estate attorney. "Tell me about your legal obligations," I'd said. The attorney, a woman in her 50s named Rebecca Chen, had listened to my story without judgment. Then she'd pulled out a legal pad and drawn me a diagram. "Here's what you need to understand," she'd said. "Your grandmother left you that house outright, not as a trust, not with conditions. You own it, free and clear. Your parents have no legal claim to it whatsoever. But they're living there because you've allowed them to. That was generous, but it doesn't give them ownership rights. If you wanted them to leave tomorrow, you could legally require it." "What about obligation? Family obligation?" Rebecca had looked at me seriously. "There's no legal concept called family obligation when it comes to adult relationships. You can choose to support your parents, but you're not required to. Not financially, not with housing, not at all. They raised me. They were legally required to raise you. That's what parents do. It doesn't create a debt that children must repay with their entire lives." I'd sat there absorbing this. Everything I'd believed about family, about duty, about the natural order of things, it was a story I'd been told, not a law, not even a truth. "What about the paper they want me to sign?" I'd asked. Rebecca had frowned. "Without seeing it, I can't say for certain. But given what you've told me, I'd guess it's either a deed transfer or a will making them beneficiaries. Don't sign anything without having an attorney. Review it first." I'd left her office with a folder of information and a strange new feeling, agency. For the first time in my life, I understood that I had choices, real ones, not the false choice between being a good daughter and being selfish, but actual choices about how I wanted to live, who I wanted to be, and what I was willing to accept. I drove home, went inside, made dinner, and began planning my escape. Over the next 6 weeks, I became a ghost in my own life, present but planning, smiling but strategic. First, I called a real estate agent who specialized in off-market sales. "I need to sell quickly," I'd explained. "And privately. No signs, no public listings. You'll get less than market value," she'd warned. "I know, but I need this done fast and quietly." We listed it to her private network at $950,000. It sold in 11 days to a young couple relocating for work. Cash offer, 30-day close. They offered $980,000 after the inspection. I accepted immediately. I told my parents nothing. Next, I started sorting. Every evening while they watched TV, I'd go through my room, the basement, the attic. My things went into boxes marked for my new apartment. Their things, and after 2 years they'd accumulated plenty, went into boxes marked for storage. I'd rented a storage unit 40 minutes away, paying for a year up front. Everything of theirs went there, carefully inventoried and photographed. I wasn't going to give them ammunition to claim I'd stolen or destroyed their belongings. I'd hired movers for a Saturday when I knew they'd be out. "We're visiting the Hendersons," Mom had told me. "Be gone most of the day." "Have fun," I'd said. The moment their car turned the corner, the movers arrived. We worked for 7 hours straight. My furniture, my boxes, my grandmother's few remaining possessions I'd managed to save, everything went into a truck heading to a storage facility in another city. The house became empty except for my parents' things and the furniture that had come with the house. I'd already secured an apartment 3 hours away, small, affordable, in a city where I'd accepted a new job that started in 3 weeks. The job offer had come through a professional contact, and I jumped at it. New city, new start, new Nancy. I changed my phone number, opened new bank accounts at a different institution, updated my address with the post office, my employer, everyone who mattered, set up mail forwarding to a P.O. box. On the final Friday, I withdrew my notice at work. My boss, who I'd confided in partially, hugged me. "You're doing the right thing," she'd said. "Sometimes loving yourself means walking away." That night, I cooked dinner for my parents one last time. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, comfort food, a last supper of sorts. "This is nice," my father had said. "We should eat together more often." I'd agreed noncommittally. After dinner, I went to my room, now empty except for a sleeping bag and a suitcase. I lay there in the dark, listening to them move around the house that had never really been theirs, that would soon not be mine either. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow, it all changes. I felt no guilt, no sadness, just a clean, clear sense of purpose. The burden I'd carried for 32 years was almost gone. One more day, and I'd finally set it down for good. They came home Sunday evening to locks that didn't work. I wasn't there to see it. I'd left at dawn, my car packed, heading to my new apartment, but I'd arranged for my attorney to be there at precisely 5 p.m. According to Rebecca, who called me later, my father had tried his key 3 times before pounding on the door. My mother had been calling my phone, the old number, which now belonged to someone else entirely. Rebecca had approached them on the porch. "Mr. and Mrs. Jansen, I'm Rebecca Chen, Nancy's attorney." "Where's Nancy?" my mother had demanded. "What's going on? Why won't the door open?" "Nancy is no longer residing here. The house has been sold. I'm here to facilitate your retrieval of personal belongings, which have been carefully packed and stored. You'll receive the storage unit address and access code once we've completed some necessary documentation." "Sold?" My father's voice had risen. "She can't sell this house. It's family property." "Actually, it's Nancy's property. Was Nancy's property. She had every legal right to sell it." That's when they'd started calling everyone. My old job. "They said you quit 2 weeks ago." My few friends, none of whom had my new number. They'd even shown up at my old workplace on Monday, making a scene until security escorted them out. I knew all this because Rebecca kept me updated. And because they'd somehow gotten my new number, probably from someone well-meaning who didn't know the full story. I'd finally agreed to meet them. Not at my new apartment, which they didn't know the location of, but at a coffee shop, public and busy, 2 weeks after the house sale had closed. They arrived angry and dressed for battle. I arrived with a recording device in my purse and Rebecca at a table nearby, close enough to intervene if needed. "How could you do this?" my mother had hissed, barely sitting down before launching in. "We're your parents." "I know what you are," I'd said quietly. My father leaned forward. "Whatever you think you know." I'd pulled out my phone, placed it on the table, pressed play. Their voices filled the space between us. "We'll just keep pretending to be nice as long as we can get her to sign the paper. She's always been soft-hearted. The burden we carried all these years." The color had drained from my mother's face. "You didn't hang up," my father had said stupidly. "No, I didn't." Silence, heavy and thick. Then my mother, recovering quickly, her voice shifting to that wounded tone I knew so well. "We were frustrated that day. We didn't mean those things. You know how people say things they don't mean when they're stressed? We've been under so much pressure." "You meant every word," I'd interrupted, my voice steady and calm in a way it had never been with them before. "And you know what? It doesn't matter anymore whether you meant it or regret it or want to explain it away. I'm done." I'd stood up, pulling my purse over my shoulder. I'd placed a manila envelope on the table between us. "Inside is the storage unit information. Your belongings are there, carefully packed and inventoried. Everything you brought to the house, everything you bought while living there. The first 3 months of rent are prepaid. After that, it's your responsibility." "Nancy, please," my father had started, his hand reaching across the table. "I'm not your retirement plan. I'm not your burden to carry and then cash in on. I'm not your anything anymore. Don't contact me again. Don't try to find me. This is over. I'd walked out before they could respond. Rebecca had followed, and we'd left them sitting there, the recording still playing on loop. Freedom felt exactly like this. Walking away first. The first month in my new city, I kept expecting them to show up. Every knock on the door made my heart race. Every unknown number made me hesitate before declining the call, but they didn't come. Couldn't come. They had no address, and I'd made sure every public record led to dead ends. Rebecca sent me one final email 6 weeks after our coffee shop confrontation. Your parents hired an attorney to explore legal options. After reviewing the case, their attorney advised them they have no grounds for action. You'll likely have no further contact. I'd read that email 3 times, waiting for the relief to come. It did, but slowly, like thawing after years of freezing. My new job was good. Better than good. They valued my skills, respected my boundaries, paid me fairly. My boss was a woman who'd built her own company after leaving a toxic family business, and she understood without me having to explain much. You did what you had to do, she'd said during one of our early conversations. That takes more courage than most people ever find. I'd started therapy, real therapy, not crisis management, but deep excavation work to understand how I'd reached a place where I believed love required self-sacrifice. Dr. Martinez had given me language for what I'd experienced: financial abuse, emotional manipulation, conditional love that wasn't love at all. You can grieve the family you didn't have, she'd told me, while celebrating the person you're becoming. Some days were harder than others. I'd see mothers and daughters shopping together, laughing easily, and feel the loss of something I'd never actually possessed. But increasingly, I felt something else too. Freedom. Real freedom. Possibility. The profound sense that my life was finally, actually, truly mine to shape and live. I'd started volunteering at a local organization that helped young adults transitioning out of toxic family situations. I'd share my story carefully, strategically, helping others see that loving yourself isn't selfish, that boundaries aren't betrayal, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. 6 months after leaving, I visited my grandmother's grave for the first time since moving away. I'd brought flowers, black-eyed Susans, her absolute favorites from the garden she'd so patiently taught me to tend with care and attention. Thank you, I'd whispered, placing them on her headstone, for seeing me, for protecting me even after you were gone, for teaching me that I had value just by existing. The wind had moved through the trees, and for a moment, I'd felt her there. Not in any supernatural sense, but in the strength she'd given me, the foundation she'd built that had held firm when everything else crumbled. I wasn't a burden. I'd never been a burden. I was a woman who'd learned, late but not too late, that choosing myself wasn't selfishness. It was survival. It was sanity. It was the only way forward. Peace didn't come from fixing people who'd never respected me. It came from respecting myself enough to walk away. And so I had.